price. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you need a
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
I'm Dungeon Master Rob, and we have another special guest on the show today. Hello, Paul. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You are our second return guest. Welcome back to the second time on Dungeon Master of None. We had you on 2 years ago.
Oh God, was it? I mean, it's either was 3 weeks or it was 15 years. I don't know.
Hard to tell.
Something like that.
But we talked to you about D&D and history and fantasy racism and all kinds of good stuff. And boy, a lot has happened since then. In specifically the areas that we talked about.
Yeah, some good stuff.
Some good stuff. Some.
And Paul, you're an expert on the Middle Ages, medieval times, and how the public perceives them. So as this expert, like, how mad do you get in medieval or fantasy movies where a bunch of archers are about to fire some arrows and then the commander shouts fire instead of loose? Does that make you mad?
That I get less annoyed at that as when I see all of these archers setting the tips of their arrows on fire. Because that's not a thing. Not only would it not work, like, worst case scenario, you burn your arrowhead off. Best case scenario, like, it puts itself out because, wind is a thing. It puts itself out as it's flying. Like, there is no historical evidence for flaming arrows ever actually being productively used on the battlefield. And believe me, they used a lot of stuff. They used a lot of weird things and never used flaming arrows.
Aw. Well, okay.
I know.
I'll shout loose then. Fire. No fire.
Okay. I will. I don't know if this is going to end up in the episode, but I will tell you that when I was at Burning Man a few years ago, that that a group of people did light a mock Trojan horse on fire with flaming arrows. That is not a battlefield demonstration. It was also modern day. But if I could go back, I would tell them that they were being historically inaccurate.
Indeed.
By
not
the
least
way,
because the Trojan horse famously didn't burn. That was that's
I'm
not the
sure,
thing.
I'm not sure why they decided to do that. I just think somebody wanted to build a Trojan horse in the desert, but. Anyway,
mixing
Paul,
a couple things, that's fine.
Yeah, Paul. So I have to discuss this with you. We really have to address this before we go any further. In 2016, you said, with absolute authority, that the military flail did not exist. Now, 2 weeks ago, the YouTuber Skullgrim.
Skullgrim, noted authority.
Noted authority. 1.5 million subscribers. No,
1.5 million subscribers released a video saying, actually, Paul, you're wrong. The flail did exist. How would you defend yourself against these accusations of...
Well, first of all, I mean,
I'm so sorry.
I take the compliment to some degree. Like, Senpai has noticed me, and Senpai thinks I'm a dick. Like, that's definitely, that was a surprise. I'll definitely put it that way. I appreciate anytime anyone has a deep dive into my work. I kind of take it as a compliment, especially if it's done in good faith and not, that they're trying to actually engage with the content of the article. And like, I've had plenty of people criticizing my stuff and do so in much worse ways. So at the end of the day, I think it's fine. I think I certainly disagree with Skullgrim, and I've been chatting with him a little bit. I'm going to see if there's a way that I can like go on a show or whatever, and we can talk about it. But I do think that there are three things that I want to talk about. One is that Skullgrim seems to be approaching it, with no offense to anyone who's listening, was approaching it from a reenactor's perspective, which is to say, building the thing and testing it with an idea that if it is viable in tests, in a Mythbusters sort of way, literally a sort of practical engineering sort of way, if it is viable in tests, then that sort of proves something about its reality in actual life.
If
think-
Doug Marcaida will come and smile at you and say, "It will kill,"
Oh.
then it's historically accurate.
Oh my god, that guy is so creepy when he does that. Oh my god.
It
I've watched like
kill.
6 or 7 episodes of that show and I can't watch anymore because every time he does it, it's just like, I don't want any part of this anymore. Oh my god. Yeah, so just because it will kill doesn't mean it was real, you know? So that's one thing. Another is that, and again, and this is a perspective that I've seen because I used to be a reenactor. I know a lot of reenactors, and I know that sometimes there is an inclination, when you want something to be real, you'll find a way. You'll find a reason. You kind of got to want it. And I know that my saying that the flail didn't exist is both controversial and is kind of nuts for an actual scholar to say, which is one of the reasons why a lot of military historians, though they've said that they agree with me, like they can't necessarily come out and say it so strongly because you can't prove a negative. You can't prove that something didn't exist. And in fact, like, if one person is able to come up with one example that is undoubtedly, without question, actually from the period and actually real, my whole argument is toast. The fact that it's been 3 years and this is the first time that someone has actually responded in a way other than to say, oh dear, gives me a little bit of hope. The other thing is that some of the examples that he cites from museums, like, for example, there's one that he talks about that's in a Russian museum. And he says, "Oh well, I'm just going to take this at face value and trust the museum's representation of what this is." And I will tell you, as a person who works at the Smithsonian, that is insane.
Are you saying that museums are sites of production of knowledge and they're just somehow not everything that is there can? Yeah, no, I'm just that's very funny.
I am,
as well.
yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to throw shade at museums necessarily, but like a good museum is constantly re-examining its collection and constantly trying to do the work of actually understanding that a lot of the things in their collections are actually fake. I mean, famously, a lot of the art that's even on display, has over time, a lot of it has been found to be fake. The Met collection, they have a number of flails in their collection, but they no longer display any of them because they think they're not fakes exactly, but they're like 19th century reproductions of nothing in particular that they can find. So overall, I'm still pretty confident about what I said. I think the one complicating thing is, and this is part of the problem with publishing online versus publishing in print. Actually, a couple months after I published that initial article back, I think it was in 2016, I was asked to do a follow-up article by Military History Magazine. And so I did, and I did a lot more research for that. And I actually found, I think, where the idea of the flail comes from. And that is from what's called kisten, which are these weapons that were used in Eastern Europe. And we've found several hundred. Only the heads are left, but they're very different from the flails that you see in movies like Kingdom of Heaven or in D&D books. It's not like a chain with an iron ball on the head. It would be something like rope with a wooden or bone head, and rope or sort of braided leather. And so it has sort of a twist and a flex to it. It's kind of an improvisational or secondary weapon, and it was primarily used by steppe horse archers like the Mongols, for example. And so if you then put it in that context, it's got a very different use case. It's a very different sort of weapon. And my working theory is that this was something that the knowledge of this weapon was transmitted to Europe and so made its way into illustrations, but that the illustrators were putting it into a context that they could understand, i.e. as something with a chain and an iron head rather than something that was braided leather with a bone head. So
kind of like you see all this medieval art of like the Bible stories and everyone's like wearing chainmail and there's castles and stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That they take something they take something from the context in which it was created and then they put it in a context that they can understand today.
I was mostly having fun with you, though I really appreciate your explanation. My understanding of your article, which was very good, it was that this is a impractical weapon, and it's unlikely that it was used very often at all in in the way that is depicted right in medieval like tapestries or manuscripts or whatever, which is not the same thing as, like you just said, perhaps there were some analogous weapons wielded by steppe horsemen. I didn't watch all of Skullgrim's video. This is not really my reenactment is not my particular area of interest. What this reminds me of, though, and do either of you remember the Deadliest Warrior television show?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that thing. Yeah.
So,
yeah, like knight versus samurai.
That's
that
right,
old
knight
chestnut.
versus samurai. So the way that
Knight every time, by the way.
the way that they determined who would win was that they would run these, to me, absurd tests where they would sort of where they'd have somebody like hit like biometric gel dummy with with an axe or like an arrow or something, and then like measure the force of that attack, and then somehow calculate a bunch of scenarios where based on this, a knight strikes with X amounts of PSI and a samurai strikes with this, and therefore a samurai would win in 9,000 of 10,000 simulations.
They would just run Monte Carlo simulations. It wasn't very complicated.
It was just like
they
an insane
had one
way
guy
to
who
determine.
could press that button on his.
Just a
stats
bizarre way to
program.
be like, this is how you would win.
I'm gonna okay. So again, not to throw too much shade, but I think I can throw shade at a TV show that was canceled 10 years ago.
It's safe, I think. Yeah,
probably 20 years ago now. Nobody's running any simulations. 10,000 simulations. There's not a person with a supercomputer sitting there going, "Oh well, if I adjust the metrics this way." No, that never happened. That was all made up.
At least one of these guys, by the way, was found to be entirely like lying about his background in military service. So I think we're entirely justified in being skeptical of this, again, 10 years canceled TV show. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. But will it kill?
But will it kill? So we talked about flails. What about snail flails? No, wait. Let's not get too distracted here. What about
flail snails? Yes.
Flail snails.
What about flail snails? What about the barbarian and the paladin? So we brought you on today to talk about everyone's two least favorite or favorite classes and some of their historical roots and abuses in the game, and maybe as dungeon masters, what we should do about them.
We should start with the barbarian, because this was the first article, and you published this. There's going to be links to all of this, everybody, but you published this on the Public Medievalist, one of our favorite sites, full of lots of good stuff about D&D and medieval era in general. But you published this in March. Improving Dungeons and Dragons racism and the barbarian. And so we have a lot to say about this, but how would you categorize this particular approach, this article, what you were?
Yeah, well, I mean, last time when I was here, it was based on another article that I had done that was looking at the quote-unquote races of Dungeons & Dragons, and looking at the way in which they were really replicating a lot of... They had the potential of really replicating a lot of problematic racism in the game. And there's been a lot of discussion about that in the intervening 2 years or so, where a lot of it has really centered around the figures of orcs. But I know James Mendes-Hodes has put out a couple of great articles on that. Graham Barber's done some really good work on that. But one of the things that I think that the community hasn't really been looking at so much is then looking at the character classes and saying, okay, if we are going to be looking at trying to see... I'd say for a theoretical, edition 5.5 or edition 6 for what they're doing, like what would I want them to do in order to make the game more inclusive and really strip out some of the racism that's kind of built into the game. And one of the first things I wanted to talk about when it comes to character classes is obviously the barbarian class. Because most of the time when people think about barbarians, you think about Conan. You think about, dude like WWE fighter, but with like a furry loincloth and a battle axe, like standing on a pile of enemies and, with a woman clinging to his leg. But obviously the word barbarian itself, let's start with a word. The word barbarian has a long awful history of being deployed, particularly by white people against people of color, as a way of describing them as uncivilized. As a way of describing them as uncivilized in order to justify to themselves and to the people of color why they are doing the awful colonizations, murders, genocides that they are doing. And obviously the word barbarian goes back much further than that. The ancient Greeks were using the barbarian to describe basically anyone that was not ancient Greek. The Chinese have a long history and a long, interesting history of the way that they regard people as barbarians or not. But in the modern context that we're talking about it today, and particularly when it comes to a book that is really based on quote unquote Western culture and is engaged with contemporary society, we really need to be looking back at the history of the way that barbarian has been used during, colonization, empire, and even to the current day.
Well, and that's, and I just want to stop on that for a moment, because this is interesting to me. You're absolutely right that the word barbarian is just very heavy with racist and colonial and imperial values, but the origin of the word and similar words in like you said in China and India is literally, it's dividing the world into us and them. It's those who are not
uncooked,
those who are not of the civilization, those who do not belong to the metropole or to the sorry, Matt.
Well, I was just going to say, isn't it really unusual in that in Dungeons & Dragons, we have a bunch of classes. Most are defined by like a relationship or an occupation, cleric, wizard. There's only one that's like the other connotation is like a place you're from, right? It's not what you do, it's where you're from, and that's barbarian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the player's handbook is, when you look at the player's handbook, when it comes to the barbarian, a lot of the descriptions that they have are loaded with these ideas of being on the fringes of civilization, outside of civilization, in a way that actually ethnographers, sociologists don't talk about people as civilized or uncivilized. We talk about different civilizations and their different attributes, but you don't talk about someone as being uncivilized. That isn't a thing. That is a pejorative slur that people have used in order to attack other people. And so then even when you step beyond this idea of civilized versus uncivilized, you start to also get a picture of who the player's handbook and also the other core books of D&D are painting as uncivilized and what analogs they have in the real world. So obviously the barbarian, if you look at the art, if you look at some of the descriptions, there's definitely a lot of Old Norse elements. As a medievalist, I can see that right away. And that has a lot of really interesting historical roots in terms of the berserker tradition within Norse myth and legend. But also, if you look, there's a lot of really, really gross analogs, particularly to Native Americans or indigenous people, or Africans or Pacific Islanders. In a way
and this goes way back in D&D. Like earlier today I was going through the Complete Barbarians Handbook from 2nd edition, and I had to send Rob a screenshot of one of the like iconic barbarians is a blue-eyed white blonde lady in like traditional northern Great Plains Indian stuff, like with a painted horse.
Oh yeah,
I'm like, is this I was like, is this?
She's the kind of girl you might run into in Coachella. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
She's one of the Nephites. She's one of the Native Americans.
One of the.
Okay, sorry. Anyway,
underwater submarine. The European submarine people. Well, I mean, it's. This was so interesting. I had thought about this before, because the barbarian is now such a sort of universal fantasy or fantasy RPG archetype. You have them in Diablo. You have them in MMORPGs. Like they're everywhere. But that's the rage mechanic is something that is often a part of that, or often alluded to or represented somehow. But that's a distinctly berserker type of aesthetic type of feel, which is
asterisk.
Yes, yeah, and you write about this extensively because that's also sort of a misunderstanding in a lot of ways. But the problem with the Barbarian that I have, and there's a lot of problems with the Barbarian, and there's a ton of historical problems with the Barbarian. But part of the problem with the Barbarian as it exists is that it's mechanically kind of a mess, and it's also not a great class. Like Matt was talking about earlier, how most classes have a relationship, or they're a profession, or there's some sort of vocation, right? You are a person who does something, but a Barbarian is either somebody from the fringes, somebody from the outskirts, and they are without fail somebody who rages. They are somebody who must, through one form or another, fly into some sort of battle trance, which is a little interesting in and of itself. But given the structure of the rest of the D&D classes, making this its own, this really feels. There are many things in Dungeons and Dragons that feel like vestigial, like legacies of older editions, and increasingly, I feel things like alignment and but also, like, especially things like the Barbarian fall into this category. They just it makes less and less sense the further we get from the origins.
Well,
yeah. Oh, sorry,
the rage thing. I will just say the rage thing, right, is not super old in D&D. Well, it is super old. It's 20 years old,
right?
But it doesn't go back all the way. Barbarian was first like a fighter subclass.
That's right.
But I mean, the Rage was a 3rd edition and carried on through 4th and 5th edition, and has now become the defining feature. But what you were talking about earlier, Paul, in the earlier editions, the Barbarian, defined by all of the sort of just really terrible language that is used to describe non-state peoples, people from the fringes of whoever is doing the writing is there. There are people from the jungles, the islands, right? All that's in the earlier edition, even if the Rage isn't.
Yeah. And I'll actually push back just a touch, which is that I don't think that the idea of a Rage Warrior class is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the Iliad, in the Iliad, Achilles it's all about the rage of Achilles, and Achilles going forth and slaughtering thousands of his enemies based solely on his rage at the death of Patroclus, basically his lover. And there are other examples as well. You can find in the Arthurian legends, you can find instances where Lancelot went into an unstoppable killing rage, things like that. However, we have to acknowledge in doing so, if we're going to keep the rage, we need to be very careful with it, because this has also been the way that people of color, particularly people who have been colonized, have been described as fighting against the colonizers. If you look at the Boer War, if you look at the Zulu fighters, that the way that they are described is using these terms, especially the term savage, as used in D&D, savage attacker, savage, that sort of thing, that it is, on the one hand, the idea of a rage-based fighter isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it absolutely is a minefield, a horrible minefield, when you look at it within the broader context of the way that this has been used to paint huge numbers of groups of people and the way that they fight with a really negative light.
And I agree that the tradition of the battle rage or the battle trance is one that exists in a lot of stories and a lot of traditions, and I would actually like to keep this in some way. To me, it feels like it needs to be just dismantled and built from the ground up. It's just the Barbarian as it exists doesn't do what it intends to do, and like you said, it is saddled with all of this this racist baggage. If nothing else, language, but then more than that, the very structure of it. You very correctly go into detail about the path of the Totem Warrior, which is one of the core subclasses of the Barbarian. And there were, Matt, you were going through some of the older editions. There was a Totem Warrior Barbarian, or maybe it was a druid, but this is a thing that has been in D&D for a while. And Paul, do you want to talk about specific? I mean, our listeners probably will know, but if you want to go into detail about like why that's not good,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you probably already know what I'm going to say, but it's really gross cultural appropriation. It's really gross cultural appropriation of particularly the Totem Warrior. One, the idea of totems, particularly around totem poles, which is part of the religious traditions of of indigenous people on the West Coast. And then also sort of conflated with that is this idea of the spirit animal as well, which is something that is from a totally different indigenous group and an indigenous religious tradition. And one that is so commonly appropriated in our culture, and offensively so, and has been for 30, 40 years. So much so, in fact, that the Lakota and Nakota tribes got together and had and penned, I think in the 90s, I need to look back on exactly when, but a declaration of war against these cultural appropriations and those who would do it. Because these are their sacred traditions. This is their religion. And it's not just a religion like any other. This is a religion that they, again, have been brutalized for practicing and has been denied them the ability to practice it freely. So much so that there had to be acts of Congress put in place, religious freedom acts that allowed them the right to practice their faiths openly. And so based on that, it's not just a BuzzFeed quiz, what's your spirit animal? It's not just the optics of it. There is a long history of protest against this for very valid reasons that needs to be respected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you don't believe that like this sort of appropriation isn't like baked into the Barbarian, it's not just like this one subclass, right? This goes back 30, 40 years, right? Look up the old, Barbarian kits for the medicine man or woman the dream walker, any of the art going back in any of these editions, right? All of this is right here. It's all been part of this class for a very long time.
Well, and this is, this is broadening the conversation, but the use of shamans or witch doctors or any number of other sort of like religious tradition as class names, I suppose there might be a way to do this appropriately. I don't know that I have ever seen it done. Nor do I think that anybody who ever does any or uses this as sort of an archetype is trying. But this is the very casualness with which, especially like Western game designers will just pull and then, like you said, conflate religious traditions together without even bothering to listen or understand is quite. It's distasteful, I guess I would say is the nicest thing I can say about it. And it's, Wizards and Dungeons and Dragons has done a lot because people have been yelling at them for 4 years, 5 years, forever, but especially
since since 5th edition came out, really,
especially loudly,
5 years ago.
In the last 5 years. But there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of, legacy racism and appropriation, and it's not great. You call the Barbarian the Washington Redskins of Dungeons and Dragons, and I would frankly prefer that this be called the fighting class, in the same way that it's now the Washington football team. That leave it as the Barbarian. And I mean, if I were gonna slap a fix on this, I would remove all the terrible language and call it the Berserker class and let people figure it out from there. But like I said, I think it needs to be. I think you need to start over with this one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Berserker name is better, except for the fact that that's obviously a subclass, but it's not a subclass I've ever seen anyone play because it's garbage.
Right, it's really bad.
The others are better.
Makes you worse in some ways.
Yeah,
it's the
it
only
makes you actively
subclass in the
worse.
game that makes you worse by
I
picking.
mean, Purple Knight is also really terrible. But yeah, okay.
I forgot that existed. But
Yeah,
yes,
well,
correct.
as did we all.
I do think like there is some value to like fix this. Drawing here like James Scott, bless his heart, great author, wrote in one of his more recent books that was mostly about the invention of agriculture, this really great chapter that I think everyone should take a look at called The Golden Age of the Barbarians. And he's using this word sort of tongue-in-cheek to point out that for most of human history, including a lot of the history that games like Dungeons & Dragons draw from when they're building their worlds, that quote-unquote barbarian people, non-state peoples, right? People outside the imperial centers represented the vast majority of the globe, right? In terms of area and often in terms of population. And like wanting to include like those histories and peoples in our games and our world building, I think is a really great thing. But he sort of pushes back against traditional histories, James Scott does, and sort of saying that a lot of the times these peoples lived a better life than people in the sort of settled imperial place because they got a lot of the benefits because when they felt like it, they could raid in and take some of the nice agricultural stuff, but they didn't have to live in like disease-ridden villages and, you know, have oppressive taxes and lords on top of them. Anyway, I think it's something to be saved, right? This broader idea of like, hey, you know, this class of, or not a class particularly, but just the general idea of like, including non-state peoples in our world building.
And another note to DMs, I think, who are listening, which I imagine is a fair portion of your audience.
Hopefully 99%.
We're guessing. Yeah.
Yeah. I would highly recommend that a place to start when it comes to this sort of thing is to banish the idea of civilized versus uncivilized from your vocabulary, and instead start thinking about the different attributes of each civilization, and start thinking about them neutrally, not as positive or negative traits. Not as things that if you're playing a 4X game would give you or get you points, but as just as differences between these societies. And I think the next step is also looking at even the monstrous humanoids that I think 5th edition has been I think rightly rehabilitating in their, at least sometimes has been rightly rehabilitating. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I noticed in Van Richten's guide there was one note of like the evil goblins, and it made me cringe. But the idea of stripping out inherent evil and inherent badness, inherent uncivilization, these sorts of inherent characteristics, which are really one of the beating hearts of racism that are still present in the book.
Well, and this is, and I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I'm gonna own, my own ignorance here. But this is a good place to start, like you said. Exactly, this is baby's first historiography, is learning to understand, the massive bias toward quote unquote civilization in all of our historical record and the way that we talk about people. And then learning to try to understand people who lived outside of that framework and dismantling the idea of civilized. It wasn't until I got to college that I stopped using words like savage and primitive and things like that, because I didn't know any better. And I learned pretty quickly, but it's not something that's necessarily intuitive. But once you start to dismantle that in your mind, it opens up an awful lot of history and the world, and it enriches your understanding of the past in a very real way.
And I think even putting that in your fictions. When I've recommended this to people, I've had some people push back on me and say, "Oh, well, isn't that just going to make it less fun and less interesting?" And especially as a world builder and a DM, I say, "No, it makes it much more interesting and far more rich and exciting if you start to think about these as people with differences, and really interesting and exciting differences, but not just this like lick of paint that says, oh, you're uncivilized and therefore I'm allowed to kill you and not feel bad about it."
I mean, that's exactly right. I think this does, if anything, it makes it just so much more interesting. You know, the people who were maligned as barbarians, of course, they were people. They had rich and interesting and sophisticated societies, and they had traditions, and they had rituals, and they had stories of their own, and they were every bit as interesting, and often very much more so, than the people who called them barbarians. It's just that sometimes you have to work a little bit harder to get to that. You know, the history doesn't reflect it.
And of course, as Rob has just pointed out, yet the history doesn't reflect it. It doesn't even reflect it in the like narrow case that Dungeons & Dragons presents the barbarian in. Time and time again, maybe not exactly in 5th edition, but in some of the earlier editions, the barbarian is always presented as, these are people who come from a place where no crops can grow, on the edge of wilderness, where they have no written language. Right. And then, of course, in the same examples they give examples of plenty of agricultural peoples, plenty of peoples with written languages, you know. It's like, okay, which one is it, right? It's obviously not going to be either, but it just doesn't even work with even the own examples they've chosen, right? The Vikings had a written language. We've got big writings of theirs. It's on rocks everywhere. I saw some graffiti of theirs at the Hagia Sophia once. It was cool.
They could in fact grow crops in Denmark. Crops. You know, it's not actually a, you know, rocky wasteland. You know, that's not why they went a Viking. It's, you know, it's yeah.
So anyway, I don't know if I want to get us too far afield here, but I do feel like, right, this class could be saved. I think you brought up a great example, like Achilles, Lancelot, right? Everyone wants to play a, you know, sort of Conan style action hero or heroine, you know, someone who definitely has is a tank, can take lots of damage, maybe has better senses than the rest of the party, you know, is really good at spotting danger and has great tactical awareness. Basically, like we have those today. They're like commandos, right? We have like people who are like good at that stuff. I feel like if you're like, oh wait, do I have to throw this class out? No, I mean, I think you can take some of the core parts of the class, rename a lot of it, redesign some of it, and yeah, you have something that people do really like.
Well, you mentioned this in your article. In the stories, the Norse stories, right? Berserkers are they're the guys that they're the Worf, right? They're the Worf effect. They're the big guys that got to get beat up. But like this is Worf. Worf is a berserker or barbarian in a sense, or just like the big guy. You're the big tough guy. You're the Rock. You're, you know, whoever. There's lots of stories where this is not a doesn't have to be an outsider, somebody from the fringes of civilization. I agree with Matt. You reorient it towards, rather than being a skilled armored fighter, you're a big, tough, physical fighter, and that's how I would. Yeah. God, I hope that they redo this if they do a 6th edition. I don't know that I can do another edition with. I don't know if they do another like a full. If we're 6 editions in, and this is not the only thing I would remove, but and they haven't even made like an attempt to sort of be like, well, do we need to stick to the same X number of character concepts that Gary Gygax came up with in whenever? And it
seems as if we've kind of hit the improv rules part of 5th edition, which is the yes anding, and just adding more and more and more stuff, which I think is. There was a point at which I know that 2nd edition very quickly got to that point.
Yes.
And I think that we are kind of hitting that glut. And so I do think that if they're not thinking about a 6th edition now, I would be surprised. which is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in these conversations, because I think that these are, hopefully, I hope that Wizards is listening. Not necessarily, I mean, hey, I hope they're listening to this podcast, but like, I hope that Wizards is listening to the fan communities and really thinking about what kind of breaks they need to have from their past, because they've done it before. This isn't unprecedented.
Well, and it was, we haven't discussed the change that they made after the last time we talked, but they listened, and there are things that I would have liked them to do, but they wrote an article about races in Dungeons and Dragons, about the half races. They detached ability scores from your racial ancestry. You know, it was. I was 90% satisfied with that. I was very impressed. I thought that I was more than I expected from Wizards of the Coast. So maybe they will listen, but it does seem like some things they're less willing to mess with, and that's my concern with the Barbarian for sure.
Well, shall we? Is there anything more to say about the Barbarian, or whatever we're gonna call it from the Outlander, the Highlander? That's Fringer.
I think Rage Warrior, Berserker, those sorts of things. Yeah.
Star Wars even had the Fringer. I remember.
Anyway,
the Fringer. Yeah, it was the worst class in the game.
It was a very wasn't that the like Luke Skywalker class? Like,
it was the Luke Skywalker class. You lived on
before he became a Jedi,
Tatooine.
so you could be somebody who like lived on Tatooine and had a bunch of. I guess it was like no, it wasn't like the Bard, because there was a actual like class.
You were actually really good at technology, because you had to use
like
all your
things.
Junk to build things. Yeah, you're good at fixing things in survival. Anyway,
I don't know if we have to go into this. In fact, it doesn't have anything to do with anything. But before we move on from the Barbarian, you know, we mentioned Conan as sort of the origin of this, and oh god, you know what? This is going backwards. It's just Robert Howard was obsessed with being Irish. You guys knew this, right? Did you know this?
No, I didn't know this.
He was like obsessed with having Irish blood. He was one of those like white guys in the early 20th century who got like really into being like to having Irish ancestry and being, you know, of Irish descent. And I found a couple articles on this, and it was clearly like reflected in his Conan stories, and his he talked about his Celtic, you know, blood and his restless, unstable mind all the time. Anyway, it's just you kind of love it and hate it when, you know, an author's sort of subconscious is just like right there out on the page, and Robert Howard is definitely one of those guys where you can just sort of like see his you know, the things that, you know, plague his unconscious.
And next, we're going to talk about H.P. Lovecraft. No.
Speaking
his
of
good friend, his pen pal. Okay.
So yeah, sorry, Matt, you were trying to transition.
Oh, I was going to transition to talk about the Paladin. Another class that has some problematic faves to do a little bit of investigating on.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the Paladin now. All right, so since we talked about the word barbarian, let's talk about the word paladin. Word paladin, if you're not French, you may not be familiar with the origin of the word paladin, though if you are, you might be. The word paladin really comes from a group of stories called the Matter of France, the Matter of France, not the Matter with France. That is part of sort of one of the three big groups of stories that are from the chivalric period of medieval literature. The other ones being the Matter of Britain, which is the stories about King Arthur, and then there was a Matter of Rome that was all about Troy and the ancestors of Troy.
There was also a lesser-known fourth series called Family Matters. It's much more popular.
Boo. Anyway, so the Matter of France is all about Charlemagne and Charlemagne's knights. Very similar, sort of analogous to King Arthur. But Charlemagne's knights were called his paladins, which roughly translates from knights of the palace. So they are his courtly knights. They are his core knights. And he had 12 of them. So his 12 paladins. And this is all well and good, except the problem with the matter of France, despite being very popular in the Middle Ages, is that there is a deep, deep streak of Islamophobia that you find in the matter of France. Particularly the most famous story, the Song of Roland. Song of Roland, if you imagine the tale of the 300 at Thermopylae, a famous last stand against an invading horde of enemies, basically transpose that to France, France and Spain, and you've got the Song of Roland. So it's basically Roland and his knights are taking a heroic last stand against an army of hundreds of thousands of Muslims who are going to be who are invading France. Fun fact, though. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I want to hear your fun fact first. Actually.
Yeah, fun fact. That was based on an actual battle that happened, the Battle of Roncesvalles. The problem was there were no Muslims at the Battle of Roncesvalles. It was actually a battle against the Basques. The Christian Basques of the Basque region of Spain and France, who were serving up some hot justice because Charlemagne tore down their walls, and so they decided to kill his army, which they then did. But never mind. No, let's never let reality get in the way of some medieval Islamophobia.
Absolutely not. Well, I was just going to say that I've read, not in French, but I've read the Song of Roland. It's a lovely poem. It's a very it's a chivalric tale. There's tragedy and heroism, and it's nice. But exactly like you said, it's very much like here's these savage invading hordes of Muslims, and here's this tragic doomed knight, and it is very like Islamophobic, and of course, not at all historically accurate, like not even vaguely pretending to be. And yeah, so this is interesting to me. Keen-eared listeners will recognize Roland as the name of the protagonist in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, which he based off of a Robert Browning poem, which came to him in a dream about Roland, about this particular knight. But I think he calls him a paladin in that. And it was so interesting to me after learning this that was the origin of the word paladin. So we just got to the word.
Right. Now
we get to the part where we talk about what a paladin is.
Yeah. Okay. So where we get to what a paladin is, Gary Gygax took the idea of the paladin from a historical fantasy novel that the name escapes me right now.
3 Hearts and 3 Lions by Paul Anderson.
Thank you very much.
Tried to read that in preparation for this episode, but it's so boring.
I also, really bad.
A long time ago, I took a crack at it, and no.
It's very weird in that it starts off with like also very concerned with like ethnic characteristics.
Yeah.
Like a framing story where a guy is fighting Nazis, good. But then he gets transformed back to ancient Denmark, where the like free kingdoms of law are being invaded by the eastern kingdoms of chaos and fairy, and our very good Nazi smuggling or fighting boy who's been traveled back in time and becomes a knight, nay, a paladin. Has to work very hard to fight these evil monsters and not get too horny. There's constantly ladies, both good ladies and bad ladies.
The greatest challenge of any medieval knight is to not
get horny for ladies who are trying to make you horny. And he's about to get he thinks about getting horny. He's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then he comes back to the present day. And that's the end of the book. Anyway, it's called 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, and it introduces the idea of kind of paladin as like a supernatural knight or a knight with a magic sword.
Right, a knight with a magic sword. And then when Gygax took it and added some mechanics to it, that's where you start to get things like they're able to heal the sick, they're particularly holy, they have the holy sword, they have the holy, you could summon a horse, I think, when it first came in, and that was a very big deal. But if you go back to the origins of the paladin, they weren't particularly holy because of having the ability to heal the sick or do anything supernatural like that. They were holy because they were killing Muslims, and so there is a sort of there's this weird conflict that's baked into the class which I'm still trying to puzzle through exactly, because it's the ultimate fusion, even more so maybe than the cleric. It's the ultimate fusion of violence and holiness.
Well, it exactly is, and this has been the I'm sorry. I also think the Paladin's kind of a stupid class. I'm just like I'm putting my like, but ever since they finally like detached it, but it has always been lawful good. And again, alignment is stupid. But these are
Yeah.
This is a class that it can heal, but its basic mode of interaction is by doing violence. And that's, you're exactly right. It's this conflict between conflation, some kind of weird. Somehow you are holy through doing violence, which is actually not that. It's actually a very popular concept in a lot of history. I think whether or not Gygax intended this, clearly the Paladin has come to represent some kind of crusader, right?
Yeah.
It is a hospitaller. It's a Knight Templar.
They really leaned into that in third edition and 3.5. Like there's the book of the Paladin subclass book has subclasses for the Templar and the Hospitaller and even an Inquisitor, which is itself, has its own set of problems. But they're all the oppressive society. There's this persecuting society of Christians against non-Christians or people that they decided were heretical in some way. And the kind of the big problem that I have with it is, if you look at D&D, you can be a religious character. You don't have to be a cleric to have a religion by any stretch of the imagination, and you can be a questing knight. There's the Chevalier subclass for the fighter, but it's only with the Paladin, really, the Paladin and the cleric, really, where you have a god effectively saying that the violence that you're doing is empowered by them. No matter what god it is. The god of peace is saying, yeah, go for it with the holy smite, that's fine. The divine smite, I'm all for it. And particularly that the Paladin is the way it works mechanically is that it is the sort of alpha strike class, right? Because you can hit and then you can plow into that all of your holy smites and rack up huge amounts of damage. I mean, I've seen the theory crafting threads on D&D Beyond, and it's like well into the triple digits that a Paladin who's appropriately spec'd out can do. And so this idea that like God is behind my violence and God is enabling me to do violence, that the core of the class seems to be the divine smite. That's something that, and especially with all of this crusader imagery that comes along with it, I think it's long past due to be retired. I think that if you want to be a questing knight, play the Chevalier Fighter subclass, and that works perfectly fine. If you want to be religious with it, you can put that in the roleplay. That's fine. But to have a god saying your smites are like your attacks are going to do a bajillion more damage because of my blessing, it's just makes my skin crawl.
Well, the Paladin, I think, has long been like maybe 80% of the D&D community's like least favorite class because of, not because of that reason probably, but because of because of interactions at the table, right? The way it's designed, and that Paladins, at least in previous editions, uniquely among the classes had sort of, you cannot do X ever, right? You cannot willingly consort with Y ever, or you're going to lose your powers or something like that. And giving maybe the novice or intentionally bad role players license to be terrible to their friends at the table. Yes. And so lots of people have problems with it for that reason. It's funny, the two we're calling out, like the Barbarian had maybe not to the same extreme, but like the rule of like no magic items for a long time.
It also
Just
did have an
another
alignment restriction for a long time. You had to be chaotic, and it wasn't. You didn't have to be chaotic anything, but you could not be. Oh, maybe you could be neutral. Either way,
I think you just couldn't be lawful.
You couldn't be lawful, which again, this is again do away with alignment. Be done with it. But you're exactly right about the way that religion is depicted in general, but also like specifically, these are holy warriors who are blessed by their deity to do violence better is especially, and what it does. I mean, this is a bigger problem with D&D and the existence of religion in general, but you're strongly encouraged, if you want to be a religious character or have any sort of religious affiliation, to be a paladin or a cleric if you want to be effective. And by the holy warrior it's an archetype, it's a story, it's a type of hero that you see a lot, but you do not, it is certainly not required that you actually have holy powers to be a holy warrior. And I think that
I would argue, historically speaking, at least, the vast majority of holy warriors did not have any supernatural powers.
That's right. Some of them didn't even have a magical sword. I mean, some of them just use normal swords or spears.
Are you even trying at that point?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, and I hadn't thought about this, but I think it discourages people from making just I'm a fighter who's dedicated to Lathander or something like that. Because if you're going to do that, you might as well just be a paladin of Lathander, right? It narrows, I think, character options and roleplay decisions.
And I know what some of the folks listening are going to be saying is that with 5th edition, particularly with some of the supplementary books, they've really been leaning into it not necessarily being religious, but that it being based on the oath, and that the oath is not necessarily religious. Sometimes, like the oath of the crown, that is an oath to a secular authority.
I'm sorry, that's a good point. This is a change that they did for 5th edition that was better. The paladin is a little bit.
It's one of those things where I feel like they see the problems and they're trying to make changes, but because of the fact that they're not willing to make the clean break, it's always going to have issues baked in. Because, for example, now you have certain oaths that definitely don't necessarily work for a lawful good character. The Oath of Conquest, for example, definitely, that's one. But then you have the Oathbreaker subclass, which is what happens ostensibly now when you break your oaths, which is that, like, when you break your oath, now you have like Dark Knight necromancer powers or something that you have, and so they've tried to keep the kind of paladin blackguard, duality, the holy warrior versus the like Dark Knight archetype, while then filling in other parts on the alignment chart in a way that it kind of becomes a mess, and it kind of becomes a mess. I'm all for having classes that have like role-playing components baked in, like the Warlock. And even if you want to talk about Critical Role, like the fact that they've had one of the characters in their most recent arc play a warlock who gave up his patron and then became a paladin to a particular god. But the bizarre thing with that was that that god also gave that character all of their warlock powers as well. And so it's like, wait, are warlocks just like clerics to something that's not a god? What?
Well,
what?
I also have questions about what distinguishes a patron from a god, and I have many questions about the cosmology of Dungeons and Dragons and where you draw the line. But I mean, that's a great point. And you get your powers from. A lot of it has to do with where you get powers from.
Yeah. Here are some thoughts on the like 4 quick thoughts of alternatives to the paladin that I've been thinking of that I just wanted to throw at you, Paul and Rob, and sort of see what you thought.
Yeah.
First is 4th edition. I think it actually did a better job of this than 5th edition. The background of a paladin is that through some magic ceremony, basically clerics created you. They took you, a regular person, and they said, we're going to give you some superpowers. Paladin superpowers.
This is the Captain America thing.
Right. What you do with them from here on is up to you, but we're picking you because we think you're going to be one of the good ones, right?
So Captain America, okay.
That's right.
Captain America. I actually like that one a lot. Eberron,
I like that too.
I think, does an interesting job with Paladins in that it emphasizes that Paladins are not there to basically preach or do anything with real people. They exist only to fight supernatural evil, right? Actual demons and, evil undead. I'd also say maybe are Jedi a good inspiration for Paladins, right? They're kind of knights with supernatural powers that go around. They're kind of like a global or galactic organization, but I think they might be a good replacement. And then last but not least, Pathfinder has tried to do something different with this by renaming the Paladin the Champion.
Oh yeah, that's right. I do like the Champion. It has some of the same problems, but it is released of a lot of its baggage and works a lot better as a class. The Jedi are a good analog, but they're also asshole, super cops. So I'm so yes and no. Like, yeah.
I don't know, Paul, what do you think of any of those suggestions?
Yeah, well, okay, I don't know Pathfinder that well, so I can't speak to the Champion, although I do. It does make me wonder the difference. Like, if you're a fighter and you win a tournament, does that make you a champion? But that's a whole separate thing. Yeah, I think taking the holiness out and scrubbing that completely, I think that's kind of what's needed. Because as you see, you look through the flavor text that's all over the player's handbook, and it's still got like divine this, holy that, whatever. And so I think if they wanted to lean into the idea of oaths inherently have power, I think that's great. But I think that the oaths should fundamentally change how the class works. I love the idea of the Oath of Redemption. I absolutely do not think that it goes far enough. The idea of playing a pacifist in Dungeons & Dragons, which is a game that's all about violence, I find that fascinating. And I find that awesome. And I find the fact that you can still do Divine Smites to get like 12d6 insane when you are supposed to be when you were supposed to be empowered to make peace, and so I think that this needs to be something that's more than just a name change. I think that it definitely they need to have a hard look at the mechanics and really look at the way that they're presenting this class, and just call it the Oathsworn or something like that. Like, again, it's fine. But have the core of it be some kind of divine, or not necessarily divine, but some kind of oath-fueled something that isn't necessarily all about dealing damage, that is much more keyed toward the specific oath that you've taken. If they do that, then great. But for now, it's this weird sort of hybrid of like what they clearly want to be doing with the class and what people have been playing with, and ultimately it's just a mess.
Yeah, I like that approach a lot. I think in the world building I'm working on, I really like the sort of 4th edition idea of like you were created in a ceremony. They sort of 4th edition still leans into all the tropes of you are holy, you are righteous, you are fighting on behalf of a holy and a righteous cause. But I sort of like the idea that the paladin, or whatever it might be renamed to, is just a class of someone you've been created as a weapon or a tool for some purpose. Is it to defend a community or a church, or is it to go kill some things? And then what you do with your life after that has happened creates kind of interesting role-playing opportunities, just like the warlock does, right?
Well,
anyway, so
I think I'd love to talk about what, from a historian's perspective, we all would actually like to see when it comes to classes and when it comes to, you know, a potential 6th edition. That might be a much longer conversation. But in the meantime, what do you think? So, given our criticisms of the Barbarian and the Paladin, you know, we mentioned some ideas for making adjustments or making changes, but to players or dungeon masters or people who want to avoid playing into potentially harmful tropes, what would you recommend? Different games, adjustments, things that you've done. Where would you start?
Yeah. So when it comes to the Paladin, I think that, much like I was talking about before with the one place to start with the Barbarian, I think the place to start with the Paladin is try as much as you can to divorce the powers from religion. That's like step 1. Actually, step 0 is make absolute sure that the people around your table and the way that you're presenting paladins are not connected to the way that crusaders have been portrayed in the media or in like pop culture, particularly but not exclusively the Templars. Like you look at paladins in other games and places that have no Christianity whatsoever, and they're always wearing that stupid red cross on their shirt, or like some slight tweak to the red cross on their chest. Just get rid of that completely. And I think that the idea of being devoted to a cause, and being empowered by that devotion to a cause can be a very powerful thing for people. I think the idea of dedicating your life to making the world better, is something that can really resonate with people in a really interesting way. But I would try with the oaths and with the roleplay, to put your paladins in situations where, in order to do that, in order to make the world better, it's not just about killing. It's not just about destroying someone else and lengthening the rest. It's about what we look around ourselves today and say, like, the way that we're going to be making the world a better place today, it's not just about pointing a finger at who's bad and destroying them utterly. It's about empowering, it's about healing, it's about growing, it's about all sorts of other things. But it's not just about destroying our enemies, no matter what Twitter will tell you.
I mean, this is I think this is at the core of the issue, is that Dungeons and Dragons, for all that we like about it, is a war game with role-playing elements increasingly built into it, but ultimately kind of stapled on. And we've been trying to, not we, but people in general, role players, have been trying to grapple with this for a long time, but so much of the game is oriented around combat, which makes creating or makes dealing with these particular issues somewhat challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that I, as a DM myself, with all of my encounters, I always make sure that there is a nonviolent way that this particular issue could be solved. And I really would encourage wizards to do more of that, because, yeah, you're right. The role-playing elements are kind of tacked on, but I think that hopefully Wizards is recognizing increasingly the importance of those role-play elements. I think the difficulty is knowing your table and knowing, are there going to be people at the table who are going to be upset if you don't have a combat every session? And figuring out a way to keep them happy while at the same time trying to represent a world that you want to dream about.
Well said.
Well said. Yeah. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with? I know we're waiting on more about the Paladin. Anything else you have in the works that we should be on the lookout for? Anything you want to promote from someone else?
Yeah. Oh, well, look at the Barbarian article. I've got there is a roleplay system that is being developed by Coyote and Crow.
You mentioned we backed this. We're very excited about it. I'm glad you mentioned this in your article. I'm super excited about this one.
I'm excited too. For those of you not familiar, Coyote and Crow is a 5th edition compatible world setting that has been created by indigenous creators, and that they are creating a fantasy world that is effectively the Americas if they had never been subject to colonization. And it looks cool as hell. It's on Kickstarter. I think it's passed, but you can still do a late pledge and you can still get up in on that stuff. And I am eagerly awaiting that coming out. Other than that, yeah, go check out The Public Medievalist, read the articles, send me if you are a YouTuber who has 1.5 million viewers, please do publish videos about how wrong I am about everything. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Paul. This is an absolute treat to talk to you about some more D&D stuff.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. Thanks for listening, everybody. Check out that article. All the links will be in the show notes. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.
Roland was a warrior from the land of the midnight sun, with a Thompson gun for hire, fighting to be done. The deal was made in Denmark on a dark and stormy day, so he set out for Biafra to join the bloody fray. Through 66 and 7, they fought the Congo War with their fingers on their triggers.